Hi, this is Priyanka and I welcome you all to Srijan Wednesday Webinars. If you are attending for the first time, this is a community initiative by Srijan Technologies where we will be hosting webinars every alternate Wednesday. We will have speakers from different domains who will talk about subjects like front-end technologies, UI UX, mobile apps, media, entrepreneurship, digital marketing and many more. So our today's webinar is focused on routing in Drupal 8 and decoupling the hook menu. So in the first 40 minutes, the speaker will talk about how Drupal 8 is taking the same path as frameworks like Symfony and Ruby and what are the key architectural changes in Drupal 8. The last 15 minutes will be for a Q&A round. So I request you all to please type in any questions that you have during the webinar and we will take them up towards the end of this session. I would now like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. We have with us Ashish Thakur. Ashish is tech lead at Srijan Technologies. He has been working with open source technologies like Drupal, Solr and Node.js. He is also an active member of the Drupal community. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar, Ashish. Without wasting any more time, I think we should get started. So Ashish, over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka, for the introduction. So, hello everybody, I'm Ashish and I've been working with Drupal from past 2.5 years. So lately, like Drupal 8 has been a bit of fun for at least for me because I didn't come from a Drupal background. Like I was basically working on other frameworks like and had a background in C and C++. So in this particular talk, we would be basically talking about how exactly routing has been changed in Drupal 8. And we would also talk about how it is similar to other frameworks like Rails and let's talk about Symfony as well, and which was handled via a single function called hook_menu in Drupal 7. So the basic constituents would be routing in Drupal 8, and we'll talk about similarities, and how Drupal 7 was different here, and we'll talk a bit about hook_menu. So let's go to the second slide. So to give you a small overview, what exactly is a route? So route is nothing but a path which is defined for any framework to return some sort of content on. So talking in terms of Drupal, like we have a normal node page or node/add page. So this is basically a path. So whenever Drupal receives such kind of requests, it tries to match the request to this particular requested path to a route. And depending upon that, a particular content is thrown back to the client. Right? In case that particular route does not exist, we normally get 404. So to give you a general overview of how exactly routing works, so this is an example which we are taking from another MVC framework, another PHP framework called Laravel. So over here, we have a browser which is a client. And that this particular browser sends a request, HTTP request, and the request is interpreted, and basically the path in the request is interpreted by the route, and the corresponding controller to that particular route is interpreted, and the controller fetch the data from model, and eventually the response is sent back to view, and at last the view would send back the HTML or JSON or whatever or XML to the client. So that's how typical routing works. So talking about routing in Drupal 7. So in Drupal 7, what we had a single function called hook_menu, and this particular function, apart from handling routing, it used to handle a lot of other stuff. So it used to handle access control, visual navigation, file uploading, and in case we talk about any MVC framework, this particular function hook_menu all these functions were tightly coupled in a single function called hook_menu. And in case we talk about other frameworks like Rails and Symfony, this particular concept might seem a bit alien to those guys. So let's dive a bit into how exactly routing was handled in Drupal 7. So right, so in Drupal 7, we had this table called menu underscore router. So in case you had any, in case you had any chance to look into what exactly this particular table consists of, we can do that right now. Okay, right. So what this table does, all the paths, so let's say node, and then the node ID / edit are stored in this table, and whenever a particular request is sent by a client to Drupal, so that particular path is fetched from this particular table, and the corresponding controller is fetched from this table, right? So let me quit from this. We'll come to next slide. So, and this, in case we talk about Rails, Rails has a routing file in which this is the path, and the corresponding controller would be this. And in case we talk about some other framework, let's go to Symfony, and Symfony basically maintains all of its routing configuration in a single file called routing.yml, which is located under like app/config/routing.yml, and the path would be, this is the path, and this is the corresponding controller which we would have in Symfony, right? And in case, let's see some of the examples as well. So here I have opened another front-end MVC framework, which is Ember, and even in that framework, routing is handled in a similar scenario compared to Rails and Symfony. Like we have the path and then we have the controller. Whereas in case we go back to our slide and so whereas this is how exactly routing was handled in Drupal 7. So here we have this particular module. Basically, we are talking about the core module node, and over here, like hook underscore menu is implemented, right? And this is the path. This is nothing but a normal node / in the node ID / edit path, and we have this title, and this is the page callback. This page callback is nothing else but the corresponding controller which we are talking about in other frameworks. And this is the page argument, and this is the access callback. This particular, since the guys who are already working in Drupal, they might be familiar with like access callback and access arguments. Basically, they are used for all the permissions and all that stuff in Drupal. And type and context, they are basically nothing but how exactly a menu is displayed to a user, right? So we have normal menus, like we have local tasks. So I'll show you a small example. So in this screenshot, these are nothing but the local tasks, right? So over here, all is nothing but a default local task. So these, in case we talk of in normal terms, these are nothing but tabs, right? So in Drupal 7, apart from routing, this single function hook underscore menu was dealing with permissions, and it was also dealing with the stuff like how exactly to display a particular menu in on the site, right? So what we see, this particular function has many things to do, right? It has to deal with UI, it has to deal with routing and all that stuff. So whereas in case we go to Drupal 8, in Drupal 8, much of the routing and all that stuff has been borrowed from Symfony, and the concept is quite similar, which was demonstrated in previous slide. So basically a request would come from any client. The client could be a browser, a cell phone, or anything, and that particular request would be handled, and depending upon the path, the corresponding route would be fetched, and that particular route is mapped to a controller, and when the controller is fired, controller would get the stuff from model, and eventually a response is sent to view, and the view would at last send the response back to the client. So that's how a typical request response would go in Drupal 8. And in case we see the same, how exactly routing is handled in Drupal 8. So this is the same stuff which was displayed earlier. So this was node edit form in Drupal 7, whereas this is how exactly routing would be handled in Drupal 8. So in Drupal 8, what happens is each of the modules would have a file called module name and routing.yml file, which would be stored within the root folder of that particular module. So over here, in case we talk about the node modules, the file would be node.routing.yml, and this particular code snippet has been borrowed from there. So this is nothing but a unique name given to this route. So that is entity.node.edit_form, and this is the path, and this is nothing but a wildcard. So quite similar to this over here. This was a wildcard in Drupal 7 in hook_menu, and this is same over here. This is a wildcard, and we are talking about edit form, and it defaults to node edit, and basically the entity form is node edit, and the requirement is the user should be able to, in this particular requirement, we define a lot of the stuff like, and one of the key thing which we might remember from our previous hook_menu in Drupal 7, this is nothing else but our access callback, and here we say user with node update permission can view this path. Right? So rather than let's go and check code instead. So this is the default installation of Drupal 8, and in terms of file structures, the stuff has been changed. Right now, all of the core modules are located inside another folder which is called core, and within that we have another folder called modules. So that's where all the core modules are located, which is quite unlikely in Drupal 7. In Drupal 7, all the core modules and themes were installed in the modules folder and the themes folder, which we have in the root directory. So whereas in Drupal 8, all your custom modules and in case you download some contrib modules have to be stored in this. Rather, all your core modules would go over here, core/modules. So let's open one of the modules. Go to node. Right, so we'll start over with the file which we earlier talked about. That was this one, node/node.routing.yml, which is the module name, and routing.yml. So in case we check this file, we have nothing but, in case we talk about this, looks quite similar to, this is nothing but a assertive array, in case we talk about, right? It's quite similar to JSON. So this is the unique name for that particular route, and this is the path. And we'll talk about defaults and requirements in a few minutes. And similarly, we have another, all of these things, this one, and the second one is this entity slash node dot edit underscore form. This is another route, and like then we have another one, node dot add underscore page. So this is nothing but this maps to node slash add page, right? And this particular thing, the controller for this thing is add. This is nothing but a method in the class node underscore controller, right? So we have a long list of stuff over here. So one thing which you might observe is, in some of the places, like this particular default thing has further goes down to a form, and over here it goes down to a content. And in some of the cases there could be, again we have entity form and again content over here. So let's go and dig out what exactly these stuff are. Let me keep this open and I'll go to a documentation in Drupal.org. So this particular link talks about structure of routes in Drupal 7. So whenever a module.routing.yml file is defined, you would have a path that is nothing else but, let's talk about this example. So this is a path. So this is the unique name of that particular route, and this is a path. After that, we go to defaults, and within defaults we can have output can be generated in various ways. Like one is content, and content is nothing but a unique controller which would give you a render array which can be rendered, and that can be shown on a page. And controller is quite similar to content. The only difference is the small chunks of renderable array are given in a controller, whereas forms would have a different controllers. Entity view is nothing but in case you want to, like, let's talk about any entity. Let's talk about node. In case you want to view any entity in different form, like we have default, we have a default, whereas we have another stuff called teaser for a node. And so this is nothing but, in case we want to view an entity, we have to use this, and this entity list and entity form. So let's first talk about content. So over here, you go to this particular route. So whenever a user goes and hits a path node slash add, this particular controller is fired, and so this particular control is fired. This particular control is nothing but a method called add page within a class called node controller, and the location of that thing is, so within this we'll go to source. Within source we have controller, and there would be a file called node controller. So over here we have a class, and the name of that particular file should be similar to the class which we are talking about. So this is a class which extends another base class, right? And within this we have to basically scroll down and look for the corresponding method which we are talking about. So this is the method. So that particular path, that particular route in node.routing.yml file is talking about this method within the class called node controller. So similarly, let's talk about some other example as well. So we'll see one of the node edit forms. This is node add. So yeah, so node edit form is nothing else but an entity form, right? So over here, our entity form would be node.edit. Let's see some other functions. Okay, this was right. Let's see this one. So we have, whenever we add by default, Drupal comes with either article or basic page, and in case we want to take add article or basic page, we have node/add, then the machine name of that particular node type. So this particular node type is nothing but a wildcard, and this also goes back to the same controller. And over here, the same class, but the method is different. So rather than talking about the add page, we are talking about another method called add. So let's go and look into that method. We go to source. Right. So this is again the same class, node controller, and within this class we have another method called add. Right. So over here in the node type interface, we get the type of the node which we want to add, and some sort of functions are added to create a node of this particular type. Right. Okay, so let's go back to the slides again. So how exactly hook underscore menu was decoupled, right? So in Drupal 7, like hook underscore menu had to do lot many stuff, right? In case we had to define tabs, we have to define them as local tasks in Drupal 7, and in case we want to define some sort of contextual links, that would be done via menu underscore context underscore inline in Drupal 7, and similarly all this stuff. Whereas in Drupal 8, all of these particular things are basically dissected into various stuff. So initially we talked about a single file called module name.routing.yml, right? Whereas in case we go back to the same module, the core node module, we would see lot of .yml file, right? We have menu links, we have local tasks, we have task.yml, and we might be having something called contextual.yml. So in case we talk about task.yml and take an example of this, right? And in case we want to define such kind of tabs, in Drupal 8, what we have to do, in Drupal 7, we would basically define it. Let me go back. Yes, in Drupal 7, we would do nothing but we'll define a local action, right? Whereas in Drupal 8, that particular, we would define it as a local task, right? And whereas in Drupal 8, that particular stuff goes to an entirely different YML file, and that is module name links.task.yml. Yes, let's go here. Right. So this is nothing but, in case we observe any typical node edit form, we see many tabs, right? On any typical node edit form, we see view. Either there is view, there is edit, there is delete, there is revision, and a lot of stuff. So all of these stuff occur as such kind of tabs on the node edit page. So all of these particular menu local tasks, which we used to refer in Drupal 7, are shifted to this file over here. right? And similarly, let's see another module. Okay, yeah, this is a custom module which I tried building. This is not yet complete because the last time when I built it, some of the APIs have been changed. So let's go with the first file which we're talking about. That would be our YML file content tab routing.yml file, and I'll open that. Right. So over here, what this module does is it shows a content written by a particular user, and further it allows you to see like what all articles have been written by a user and what all basic pages, and in case of some of the more content types, you can get a tabular list over here. Let's say we have press releases, we have news, and what this module does, like it shows you a tabular form of all the contents written by a user, and this is the routing file. So this is the placeholder wherein we get the user UID of that particular user, and this is the normal path, and this particular route goes to this method within a class called content tab controller. And since in our case the title of all of these controllers have to be dynamic depending upon the choice selected, so even the title would be fetched dynamically from another method called getTitle. So let's go and check this particular method in this class. We go back. Controller. So this class and the file name have to be similar. This. Right. So this is nothing but, and this, I'm calling this function called getContent, and in that I've added another file called content tab.pages, where is the actual content I'm generating, and this is nothing but a title, which this particular function is still not complete from my side. So let's go back to, and over here we're adding stuff from this page, this particular file. Let's go to this file now. Right, so over here I'm doing nothing but calling this, in that particular add content get content list page, I was calling this function from here, and this particular function does nothing but the typical queries the database and gets the content written by that particular user, and eventually at the bottom, when we get all of the stuff, we create a renderable array, and eventually call hook_theme and send over the entire renderable array back to the function wherein this particular function was called. Right. So that's how the stuff would behave over here. And apart from that, in case you observe, in this we do have sub-level tabs wherein we would see all articles in the basic page, and let's say you have other content type defined as well, the press releases or news. To define such kind of tabs, we have to use, as explained earlier, another file called module name, then local task.yml. Apparently this might have changed a bit. Right over here, so this is the title, which is nothing but this one, and after that we see all, and in all we have to basically define the parent ID, which is nothing else but the content over here. So depending upon the parent ID, this particular all thing would be shown as a child tab of the main tab called content. let's go back to the slide. I guess we are pretty much done. So the useful links which you could, one thing which I forgot about was how exactly, like in case we checked any of the YML files, so we had a path, and within the controller, long directory stuff quite similar to directory structure was written to us, right? So we have Drupal / content tab and controller, then controller tab, controller, then eventually the method which we want to call. So how exactly this particular thing is? So this particular method is located at source. Then within that we have controller. How exactly this particular mapping happens? So that like PHP PSR4 standards have been followed, and these particular links which I have added in the slide would be a good reference to follow. And apart from this, there is another thing called PHP4 namespaces and auto loading in Drupal 8. So this is nothing but auto loading, right? So we define stuff over here, and depending upon the structure defined here, basically a file would be auto loaded, which is nothing else but this particular file. So how exactly this particular auto loading happens? This particular reference would be a good point to follow. So these are, apart from that, like in case you are interested to develop further for Drupal 8, this is another good link to follow. And this particular link talks about how exactly menu API has changed in Drupal 8. This is again, this is nothing else but the section which I was following about. So this is the stuff which he talks about, the entire structure of routes. And the last thing which might interest users would be list changes. So let me copy this and right. So this page is nothing else but it talks about all the changes which have happened in past in Drupal 8, right? So let's go and check some things. Let's go and check hook_menu. So this particular list shows you all the stuff, basically all the links and basically links to documentation which deal with hook_menu, and these are nothing else but some sort of documentation wherein you can refer to, like, let's pick up something. Yes, so let's talk about this. So we had menu links in Drupal, right? In Drupal 7, and in Drupal 8 we have a new concept called plugins. And in last few months, all of these menu links were converted into plugins. So because of that reason, this module which I showed, this thing does not take into consideration the plugin concept which came into menus much later. So because of that reason, this module isn't working. So in case you want to get in touch with like what exactly is happening new in Drupal 8, this would be a good link to follow. That's pretty much from my side, and the good thing from now for Drupal developers would be, in fact, the developers from other PHP frameworks, like say Symfony or CodeIgniter and other stuff. In case a guy who is familiar with MVC frameworks and comes and sees this function, hook_menu, and this particular function is entirely alien to him. I mean, only a guy who is familiar with Drupal might know, like, this is nothing else but a callback, and that's how a typical routing is handled in Drupal 7. And a guy coming from Rails or Symfony might not even have a slightest idea like what exactly this function does. Whereas in case we show such kind of routing files to any Symfony guy or Rails guy, that guy might start having a bit of intuition like what exactly this file is doing. Because in case we go and check other frameworks, so this is Symfony, so the entire routing concepts of Drupal 8 have been borrowed from Symfony, and in case you see, this is nothing else but the same routing file, and the structure followed by Drupal is quite similar. Right? And even in Rails, the things aren't much different, right? We have the path, and this is the route. So that's how, that's where Drupal 8 is heading about. It is trying to get developers from other frameworks an easy entry into Drupal 8 so that the Drupal ecosystem and the contributions in Drupal 8 can happen much more. That's pretty much from my side. Thanks a lot, everybody. Priyanka, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ashish. That was a great session. And thank you for walking us through these interesting changes in Drupal 8. I am sure everybody found your presentation very interesting and your coding examples very, very useful. And we also hope that now a lot of developers who have experience working with other MVC frameworks will find it easy to adapt to Drupal 8. So moving on, I'm sure you guys have a couple of questions. So please press the raise hand button on your control panel if you want to ask your question using your microphone, or you can type your question in the chat box below. So Ashish, while we receive, since we have not received any question yet, why don't you just quickly walk us through the key changes that have, that are there in Drupal 8 and that are making it easier for developers from other frameworks, as you mentioned, to easily, get into Drupal. Why don't you just give us a quick walkthrough?
Sure, Priyanka, I'll do that. So like in this particular session, we just talked about routing, but not just routing, like stuff apart from routing, like many things have been changed in Drupal 8. Let me go back here. So the first thing in Drupal 8, like the concept of object-oriented programming was brought in. So like Drupal 7 did have a bit of oops in there, but majorly oops wasn't followed. So it was like the developers who were working in Drupal, like even their horizon wasn't that wide. Like their knowledge was just limited to Drupal. Like it was hard for them to shift to, let's say, some other framework, let's say Symfony. So other changes which we can talk about is like integration with Symfony, not just routing, whereas other stuff like entirely like there's another initiative called Whiskey Initiative, wherein you can use a Drupal site as a web services platform. So let's say you can use, there would be a site, Drupal site sitting in the backend, and it would give the developers a platform wherein they can send requests and receive a response and request, and that in that case a Drupal might not act like a site, whereas it would act like a engine to serve content, and that particular site would give developers a scenario wherein they can fetch responses in XML or JSON, and depending upon that particular response they can build mobile applications and some other sites, and the entire front end of a site can be coded via some other MVC framework. Let's take an example of Ember or Meteor or Angular. So you might not even use Drupal as an entire site building, but only use the Drupal to serve content, and in the front end you can use some other front end MVC framework and serve the content to the user. And apart from that, like it would be a good thing to talk about would be Symfony CMF. In case like much of the stuff which is like Drupal is CMS, right? But the much of the stuff which is there in Drupal 8 comes from Symfony CMF. So what happened, like Drupal 8 developers along with the Symfony guys they came front with this particular new concept called Symfony CMF, and all of the stuff which you see, like the routing.yml file and all the stuff, have been borrowed from here. It would be a good thing for developers to go and check this out. That's pretty much, Priyanka, in case we talk about the stuff. There could be a lot of things to explain. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Ashish. I think that was sufficient for this session. We have received our first question. Ashutosh wants to know, is it mandatory to put a controller inside SRC folder?
Yes, I'm unmuted, right? Yes, Ashutosh, that it is compulsory. So, and in fact, you have to follow a particular pattern for that, and that would come from your PSR4 auto loading concept. So initially the stuff was quite different. So let's me go to audience mode and inside this source. So it is, yes, Ashutosh, it is necessary to put your code inside that folder, and to understand that you have to go to this particular link and in fact this one to understand like how exactly the stuff which you defined in your routing file maps to a particular controller in this particular directory structure. Now, so how this thing maps to a controller within that SRC directory, this thing would be a good thing to refer about. And in fact, a lot of things have changed. The stuff which you see source wasn't even source before. Around 6 to 8 months back, this particular directory used to be called lib. And so a lot of development is happening in Drupal 8. So I think a good thing would be do a daily, you can make a habit of checking out the Drupal 8 code and see what exactly has been changed into the architecture. Ashutosh, did I answer your question?
Thank you, Ashish. And Ashutosh, if you have a follow-up question, please feel free to type in. And I request those who still have any more questions to please type them in right now, because we will be taking one last question here. If not, then you can drop us a mail at webinars@srijan.in and send your questions, feedback, and any suggestions through mail to us. Thank you once again, Ashish. I am sure everybody found your presentation very interesting and insightful. And a big thank you to all the attendees for joining us in today's webinar. I would also like to announce that our next webinar is on developing large-scale applications in AngularJS by Shyam Seshadri, founder and CEO of Fundu Solutions, an innovative web solutions company, on 1st of October. For registrations, we'll be sending you a link along with other details in a subsequent mail. So stay tuned and have a great day, guys.